Mom, I need a favor. Those words from my son Gregory had become increasingly common over the years, but something in his tone today, a practiced casualness that didn't quite ring true, made me pause as I watered the hydrangeas on my porch. What kind of favor, dear? I balanced the phone between my ear and shoulder, continuing my gardening routine. At 67, I'd learned to multitask long before it became a corporate buzzword. Well, I'm organizing this special dinner tonight at Hartwell's. It's kind of a big deal. I got that promotion I've been working toward. My heart lifted. Gregory had been pursuing this promotion for months. That's wonderful news. Congratulations. Thanks, he replied, that strange note still present in his voice. Anyway, I'm taking the family out to celebrate, but my credit card is maxed from that conference in Chicago last month, and Cynthia's is tied up with the kitchen renovation charges. I set down my watering can, giving the conversation my full attention. And you need to borrow money for dinner? Not borrow exactly. I was hoping I could use your premium card, the one with the extended limit, just for tonight. The bill's likely to be pretty steep at Hartwell's, but I want to do this right. It's a major milestone. My premium card. The one I rarely used except for emergencies and special occasions. The one with the points I'd been saving for a potential trip to see the autumn leaves in New England, a dream vacation I'd deferred year after year. Of course you can use it, Gregory, I said without hesitation. Family first. That had always been my motto. What time should I be ready? A beat of silence. Ready? For dinner, I clarified. Should I wear something formal? Hartwell's has that dress code, if I remember correctly. Another pause, longer this time. Oh, Mom, I didn't mean... This is really just a celebration with the immediate family, The immediate family. My son, his wife, my grandchildren. Not me. I see, I said, my voice steady despite the sudden hollowness expanding in my chest. And you need my credit card for this immediate family dinner. It would really help us out, Gregory continued, either missing or ignoring the shift in my tone. Cynthia's parents are in town, and they've been so supportive through this whole promotion process. And her sister's joining us too. She just got back from that study abroad program in Italy. We're making it a real celebration. Cynthia's parents, her sister, everyone but me. Will Zach and Emma be there? I asked, referring to my grandchildren, whom I rarely saw, despite living only 20 minutes away. Of course, it's a school night, but we're making an exception. This promotion is a big step up, Mom. Executive Sales Director. It comes with stock options, a company car, the works. I closed my eyes, absorbing the full picture. My son was hosting a celebratory dinner for his promotion. A milestone I'd help him achieve through years of support, from paying for his college education to providing the down payment on his house. He was inviting his wife's entire family. He was including his children. And he was asking to use my credit card to pay for it all. But he wasn't inviting me. Mom, are you still there? Yes, Gregory, I said, surprising myself with how composed I sounded. Congratulations again on your promotion. You've worked hard for it. So, about the card? Stop by any time before 5. I'll have it ready for you. I ended the call before he could respond, before my voice could betray me. I stood there on my porch, surrounded by the hydrangeas I'd carefully nurtured for years, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't the first time I'd been an afterthought in my son's life, but something about this particular exclusion, being asked to fund a celebration I wasn't welcome to attend, cut deeper than all previous slights. Moving methodically, I returned to watering my flowers, but my mind was elsewhere. 5 years since Harold died, leaving me alone in this too large house filled with memories. 5 years of increasing isolation as Gregory and his family built their lives with decreasing space for me in them. 5 years of saying yes to every request, hoping each favor might rebuild the bridge to my son's affections. As water overflowed from a pot, spilling across the porch boards, I finally acknowledged the truth I'd been avoiding. My generosity wasn't rebuilding any bridges. It was merely financing their construction of a life that deliberately excluded me. I turned off the hose and went inside, not to retrieve my credit card as promised, but to make 3 important phone calls. The first to my bank, the second to my lawyer, and the third to an old friend who owed me a favor, one that would change everything by tomorrow morning. Gregory would get his dinner tonight, courtesy of my credit card, but by dessert time tomorrow, he would be experiencing something entirely different. the consequences of taking his mother for granted, one time too many. Gregory arrived at precisely 4:30 p.m. to collect my credit card. He stood in my foyer, glancing repeatedly at his watch as if the 5 minutes he'd need to spend with his mother might derail his entire evening. "I appreciate this, Mom," he said as I handed him the sleek platinum card. "I'll get it back to you tomorrow." "No rush," I replied with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Enjoy your celebration. I'm sure Hartwell's will make it special. They're preparing a custom menu for us." "6 courses," he said, already turning toward the door. "Cynthia arranged everything. How lovely, and her parents are looking forward to it?" "Oh, absolutely. Richard's been mentoring me through this promotion process. His connections at headquarters really helped push things through." I nodded, absorbing this new information. Richard Green, Cynthia's father, apparently had connections at Gregory's company, connections that had facilitated the very promotion being celebrated tonight. Connections that Gregory had never mentioned before, despite our weekly phone calls where I dutifully asked about his work. "And Margaret?" I asked, referring to Cynthia's mother. "Will she be wearing that lovely sapphire necklace I admired at Thanksgiving?" Gregory looked momentarily confused. I'm not sure what she's wearing, Mom. Just curious. It was such a beautiful piece. The necklace I'd mentioned had been a gift from me to Cynthia's mother last Christmas, a peace offering of sorts, an attempt to bridge the unspoken tension between us. Gregory had apparently never even noticed it. "Well, I should get going. Need to pick up my suit from the dry cleaners before they close." He was already halfway out the door. "Gregory," I called after him. "What's the occasion for Cynthia's sister being there? Amy, isn't it? She's just back from Italy?" He paused, looking slightly annoyed at the delay. "Amanda. Mom. Her name is Amanda. And yes, she just finished a semester in Florence. Art history or something. How nice that she can join your celebration." I kept my tone pleasant, conversational. "Tell everyone I said hello." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face, the first acknowledgement that there might be something inappropriate about the situation. But it disappeared quickly. "Will do. Thanks again for the card." And then he was gone, my platinum credit card securely in his wallet, off to celebrate his achievement with everyone except the woman who had made it possible. After he left, I moved to my study and opened my laptop. Social media had never been my preferred mode of communication, but I'd maintained accounts to keep up with my grandchildren's lives in the absence of regular visits. Now I logged into Facebook and waited. I didn't have to wait long. By 7:15 p.m., Cynthia had posted the first photo, a gleaming table at Hartwell's set for 8, with elaborate flower arrangements and crystal champagne flutes. The caption read, "Celebrating Gregory's big promotion with the people who matter most. Blessed, chaste family first. The people who matter most." By 8:30 p.m., more photos appeared. Gregory raising a toast at the head of the table. Zach and Emma dressed in formal attire I'd never seen before. Richard Green with his arm around Gregory in a fatherly pose. Margaret Green showing off a new diamond bracelet. Anniversary gift from Richard, just in time for our celebration dinner. Cynthia's sister Amanda sharing stories of Italy with the captive audience. A complete family portrait, minus one member. At 9:45 p.m., my phone pinged with a notification from my credit card app. The charge from Hartwell's had posted $1.4387. I tapped to view the itemized receipt. Premium champagne, multiple bottles of top-shelf wine, specialty cocktails, the chef's tasting menu with supplemental truffle and caviar courses, and, the final touch, a custom cake with "Congratulations, Gregory," written in gold leaf, all charged to my card, all enjoyed without me. I closed my laptop and sat in the growing darkness of my study, the only light coming from the antique desk lamp that had been Harold's favorite. My late husband would have been appalled by our son's behavior. Harold had raised Gregory with clear expectations about respect and family loyalty. Somewhere along the way, those lessons had been forgotten. "What would you do, Harold?" I whispered to the empty room. The answer came not in some mystical sign, but in the simple memory of something my husband had often said. "Respect isn't requested, Judith. It's required." I had spent 5 years since Harold's death requesting respect from my son and his family, asking for phone calls, suggesting visits, offering financial support in hopes of maintaining a connection. Tonight had made it painfully clear that this approach had failed. It was time to require respect instead. With newfound clarity, I picked up my phone and sent 3 text messages confirming my appointments for tomorrow morning. Then I opened my safe and retrieved the documents I would need: property deeds, investment portfolios, bank statements, and the most important item of all, a sealed envelope Harold had given me before his death, with instructions to open it only if I ever felt our son had truly lost his way. "I think it's time, Harold," I said, breaking the seal on the envelope for the first time. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Harold's distinctive handwriting. As I read his words, "Wisdom from beyond the grave," I felt a strange combination of grief and determination wash over me. My kind, generous husband had foreseen this possibility and had provided me with both the emotional permission and the practical roadmap for what needed to be done. Tomorrow would change everything. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Not to punish Gregory, but to save him from what he was becoming. Not to destroy our family, but to rebuild it on a foundation of mutual respect rather than exploitation. I placed the documents in my briefcase and prepared for bed, sleeping more soundly than I had in years. The path forward was clear now. By this time tomorrow, Gregory would understand exactly what it meant to exclude the wrong person from his celebration dinner. Before we continue with Judith's plan, I want to invite you to join our exclusive story group, where you'll have access to special stories like this one without any ads. You can even listen offline. Just check out the first pinned comment below. Now let's get back to see what Judith does next. My first appointment was at Meridian Bank at precisely 9 a.m. Marcus Webb, the regional manager and a former student of mine from my teaching days, welcomed me into his office with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Harmon, it's wonderful to see you. Though I must admit, I was surprised by the urgency of your request. Life sometimes presents unexpected circumstances that require immediate action, Marcus." I placed my briefcase on his desk and removed a folder of documents. "I appreciate you making time for me this morning. Of course, you mentioned this concerns your son's mortgage, among other things." I handed him the first document, a copy of the deed to Gregory and Cynthia's house. "As you can see, I provided $175,000 as a down payment on this property 5 years ago. At the time, Gregory assured me my name would be added to the deed as a co-owner, given the substantial investment." Marcus reviewed the document, frowning slightly. "But your name isn't on the deed." "No, it isn't. An oversight that was never corrected, despite my numerous reminders." I kept my tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. I also helped them refinance 2 years ago by serving as a co-signer when Gregory's credit score temporarily dropped. "Yes, I see that in our records," Marcus confirmed, typing on his computer. "You're listed as a co-borrower on the current mortgage, which gives me certain rights regarding the property, correct?" Marcus looked up, his expression shifting to one of professional caution. "Yes, it does. What exactly are you considering, Mrs. Harmon?" "I want to understand my options if I were to call in my portion of the investment. Not the entire mortgage, of course, just my initial contribution, plus the appropriate interest it would have earned over these 5 years. His eyebrows rose. "That would potentially force them to refinance or sell, depending on their current financial situation." I suspected as much. I opened the second folder. "I'd also like to discuss these accounts." Marcus reviewed the new documents, statements from 3 different accounts at Meridian Bank. One was Gregory's business account for his independent consulting work. The second was a college fund for my grandchildren. The third was a joint checking account Gregory and I had maintained since Harold's death. "I see you have signature authority on all these accounts," Marcus noted. "Yes, Gregory suggested it would be more convenient for handling family finances. I didn't add that this convenience had primarily flowed in one direction, my deposits into their accounts rather than any actual sharing of financial management. What would you like to do with these accounts, Mrs. Harmon?" "I'd like to remove my name and all my funds from the business account immediately. For the college fund, I want it transferred to a new account solely in my name as trustee for my grandchildren. As for the joint checking account," I paused, remembering how many times that account had been drained without discussion, how many emergencies had been funded through my regular deposits. "I'd like that account closed, with any remaining funds transferred to my personal account." Marcus nodded, making notes. "We can certainly handle these changes. Is there something specific that prompted this restructuring?" I considered how much to share with this young man who had once been an eager 14-year-old in my music class. Let's just say I've been reminded that financial boundaries are an essential component of healthy family relationships. He seemed to understand more than I was saying. I'll process these changes immediately. The business account funds will take 24 hours to fully clear, but everything else can be handled today. Thank you, Marcus. There's one more thing. I removed my platinum credit card from my wallet, the same one Gregory had used for last night's extravagant dinner. I'd like to report this card as compromised and request a replacement. Was it lost or stolen? He asked, reaching for the appropriate form. Neither, but it was used in a manner I didn't authorize. I met his eyes directly. I didn't lose the card, Marcus. I'm choosing to lose the burden of being taken advantage of. My second appointment was with Harold's longtime friend and attorney, James Patterson, whose office was just 3 blocks from the bank. As I walked there in the crisp morning air, I felt lighter with each step. Decades of accommodating others' needs before my own had created a weight I hadn't fully recognized until I began to set it down. James greeted me with a hug and a concerned expression. "Judith, my dear, your call sounded urgent." "What's happening?" I explained the situation as concisely as possible. The years of one-sided giving, the celebration dinner I'd financed but wasn't invited to, and the steps I'd already taken at the bank. "Harold always worried this might happen," James said, shaking his head. "Gregory was showing signs of entitlement even before Harold got sick." "Harold left me a letter," I said, "with specific instructions." James nodded, unsurprised. That sounds like him, always thinking ahead. What did he suggest? "A complete reset of our financial relationship with Gregory, starting with my will." "Ah," James leaned back in his chair. "The nuclear option." "I prefer to think of it as radical honesty," I replied. "Gregory has been operating under the assumption that he'll inherit everything, the house, Harold's investments, my retirement accounts. That assumption has fueled his behavior. And you want to change your will?" "Not exactly. I want Gregory to know that I've changed my will. The actual changes will be more strategic." James smiled slowly, a glint of appreciation in his eyes. "Tell me what you have in mind." For the next hour, we crafted a series of legal documents that would protect my assets while creating a clear path to redemption for my son. Not a punishment, but a reset. Not disinheritance, but structured inheritance with conditions that reflected our family's true values. My final appointment of the morning was with Diane Reynolds, a real estate agent who had been my friend for over 30 years. We met at a small cafe near her office. "I can't believe Gregory did that," she said, after I related the previous night's events. "Using your credit card for a family dinner you weren't invited to? That's beyond thoughtless. It's a pattern, not an isolated incident," I replied, stirring my tea. "And patterns only change when the underlying systems change." "So you're really going to sell the house?" Diane asked. "After 40 years? "I'm going to list it," I clarified. "Whether it sells or not depends on Gregory." Diane raised an eyebrow. "This sounds more strategic than I initially thought." "It is." I handed her a folder with comparable properties in my neighborhood. "I need an accurate market assessment by this afternoon. And I need a "for sale" sign in my yard by the time Gregory returns my credit card. "That's particularly direct, Judith." Diane seemed both concerned and impressed. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." I met her gaze steadily. "The sign is negotiable. Gregory's respect for me is not." As we parted ways, I checked my watch. It was nearly noon. Gregory had texted that he would stop by around 1 p.m. to return my credit card. Perfect timing for the final phase of my morning's work. I returned home and went straight to Harold's study, a room I'd preserved almost exactly as he left it 5 years ago. From the safe behind his collection of vinyl records, I retrieved a small mahogany box containing the item that would complete today's transformation. Inside was a key and a sealed envelope with my name on it. Another message from Harold. This one meant to be delivered under very specific circumstances. The key opened a safe deposit box at Meridian Bank, a box registered solely in my name, unknown to Gregory or anyone else. Inside that box was documentation of the one asset Harold had kept completely separate from our shared finances, his ownership stake in Westlake Industries, the same company where Gregory had just been promoted to executive sales director. The same company where, unbeknownst to our son, his father had been a founding silent investor 40 years ago. The same company where, according to Harold's will, I now controlled a 12% ownership stake as a member of the board of directors. I placed the key and unopened envelope in my purse just as the doorbell rang. Right on time. I took a deep breath and went to answer it, ready to greet my son with the calm certainty of a woman who had spent her morning reclaiming her power. Gregory was about to discover that excluding me from his celebration dinner was the most expensive mistake he'd ever made, and not because of the $1,243.87 charged to my credit card. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like this video and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I'd love to know who's following Judith's journey of reclaiming her power. I opened the door to find Gregory standing on my porch, dressed in his business suit, checking emails on his phone. He barely looked up as he reached into his pocket. "Hey, Mom, here's your card back. Thanks again." He extended the platinum card toward me, still scrolling through his phone with his other hand. I didn't take it. "Why don't you come inside, Gregory? I've just made some coffee." His eyes flicked up briefly, a flash of impatience crossing his features. "I can't stay. I've got a lunch meeting with the executive team in 40 minutes. "This won't take long," I replied, my voice pleasant but firm as I stepped aside to indicate he should enter. "But it is necessary." Something in my tone finally caught his attention. He looked at me properly for the first time, confusion replacing impatience. "Is everything okay? That's what we need to discuss." Reluctantly, he stepped inside, following me to the kitchen where I'd set out 2 coffee cups on the table. As we sat down, his gaze darted to the window and he froze. "Mom, why is there a for sale sign in your yard?" "Observant of you to notice," I said, pouring coffee for both of us. "I listed the house this morning." "You what?" His voice rose sharply. "Why would you do that without discussing it with me first? The same reason you would organize a family dinner without including me, I suppose." I met his startled gaze steadily. "Independent decision-making." A flush crept up his neck. That's not the same thing at all. This is a major life decision. Where are you planning to move?" "I haven't decided yet. Perhaps a condo downtown, closer to the Symphony. Or maybe that retirement community in Sarasota I've mentioned a few times, the one you always change the subject about whenever I bring it up." Gregory set down his phone, giving me his full attention at last. "Mom, you can't just sell this house. It's been in our family for 40 years. It's my childhood home. It's my inheritance." "Ah," I said softly. "There it is." "There, what is?" "The real reason for your concern. Not that I'm selling my home, but that I'm selling what you've already mentally claimed as yours." He had the grace to look slightly abashed, but quickly recovered. "That's not fair. Of course I'm concerned about where you'll live, but this house means something to our family. You and Dad built a life here." "Yes, we did. A life that included certain values, respect, consideration, appreciation, values that seem to have gotten lost somewhere along the way." I took a deliberate sip of my coffee. "How was dinner last night?" The abrupt change of subject caught him off guard. It was fine. Good. The food at Hartwell's is always excellent. And everyone enjoyed themselves? Cynthia's parents? Her sister? My grandchildren? His discomfort was now visible. "Look, Mom, about that. I should have explained better. It was really more of a business dinner than a family thing. Richard has been instrumental in my promotion and—" "1,243.87, I interrupted quietly. "What? That's what you charged to my credit card last night, for a business dinner that included your wife's entire family, but not your mother." Gregory shifted in his seat. "I'll pay you back. If it's about the money—" "It has never been about the money, Gregory. If it were, we would have had this conversation years ago, after the down payment on your house that was supposed to include my name on the deed, but somehow never did. Or perhaps after the 3 car payments I made when you and Cynthia were temporarily short, but still managed to take that Cancun vacation the following month." His face registered genuine shock. "You knew about Cancun? Facebook exists, Gregory, just like Instagram exists, where Cynthia posted pictures of last night's celebration with the hashtag #FamilyFirst, a celebration paid for with my credit card." He at least had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt. That wasn't my intention. Intentions are revealed through actions, not words." I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table between us. "This is a statement of every financial contribution I've made to you and your family over the past 5 years. The total comes to just over $320,000, not including last night's dinner." Gregory stared at the folder without opening it. "Why are you doing this? Because it's time for a reset in our relationship. This morning, I made several changes you should be aware of. I outlined the steps I'd taken, removing my name and funds from his business account, transferring the grandchildren's college fund to a trust in my name, closing our joint checking account, and reporting my credit card as compromised. With each revelation, Gregory's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching panic. "You can't do this," he finally stammered. "The business account, I have payments scheduled. And the mortgage, you co-signed that loan." "Yes, which gives me certain rights regarding the property. Rights I've chosen not to exercise yet, provided we can reach a new understanding about our relationship going forward." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Harold that it momentarily softened my resolve. "Mom, if this is about last night, it's not about last night. Last night was merely the catalyst that forced me to recognize a pattern that's been developing for years." I leaned forward, ensuring I had his complete attention. "You have been treating me as an ATM rather than a mother, a financial resource rather than a family member." "That's not true," he protested, but his objection lacked conviction. "It is true, and we both know it." I reached into my purse and removed the key and Harold's unopened envelope. "There's one more thing you should know." Gregory's gaze fixed on the key. "What's that?" "This opens a safe deposit box containing documentation of your father's ownership stake in Westlake Industries, a 12% stake that transferred to me upon his death." The color drained from his face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your recent promotion to executive sales director at Westlake Industries occurred at a company where I am a significant shareholder and board member." I paused to let the information sink in. "A fact I've kept private at your father's request, but which is no longer a secret as of this morning's board meeting." Gregory looked as though he might be sick. "The board knows you're my mother?" "They do now, as does your CEO, Martin Westlake, who was quite surprised to learn that you had never mentioned this connection." I kept my voice level, despite the storm of emotions behind my words. He was even more surprised to hear about last night's dinner. "You told him about the dinner?" Gregory's voice rose in panic. "I mentioned it in passing while discussing your promotion. Martin seemed to think that excluding your mother, a board member of the company, from your celebration dinner showed questionable judgment." I shrugged slightly. "He may have a point." Gregory slumped back in his chair, the full implications washing over him. His career, his home, his children's education fund, all the things he had taken for granted, were suddenly revealed to be far more precarious than he'd realized. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want what every mother wants," I replied simply. "To be treated with respect, to be included in my family's life in meaningful ways, to have my contributions, financial and otherwise, acknowledged and appreciated." I slid Harold's unopened envelope across the table. "Your father left this for you. He asked me to give it to you if this day ever came." Gregory stared at the envelope, making no move to take it. "You planned all this." "No, Gregory. You planned all this through years of choices that led us to this moment." I stood up, signaling our conversation was nearing its end. "The question now is, what will you choose to do next?" As he finally reached for his father's letter with trembling fingers, I knew the next move was his. I had laid my cards on the table. I had reclaimed my power, and most importantly, I had shown my son that excluding the wrong person from dinner could have consequences far beyond a single evening. The reckoning had arrived. Gregory stared at the envelope bearing his father's handwriting, his expression a complex mixture of fear and reluctance. The strong, confident executive from moments ago had vanished, replaced by someone who looked remarkably like the uncertain boy who used to seek Harold's approval. "Should I?" He hesitated, holding the envelope gingerly. "Should I read this now?" "That's up to you," I replied. "Your father wrote it for this specific moment. Whether you're ready to hear his words is your decision." Gregory turned the envelope over in his hands several times before carefully breaking the seal. He unfolded the single sheet of paper inside, his eyes immediately filling with tears as he recognized Harold's distinctive handwriting. I remained silent, giving him the privacy to absorb his father's posthumous message. Whatever Harold had written was between father and son. I had respected the sealed envelope for 5 years, and I would respect their communication now. As he read, Gregory's expression shifted from trepidation to shame, then to a profound sadness that aged him before my eyes. When he finally looked up, The polished corporate veneer had completely crumbled. He knew, Gregory whispered. Somehow, he knew what I would become. Your father was an insightful man, I said gently, and he loved you enough to prepare for every possibility. He says, Gregory's voice caught. He cleared his throat and tried again. He says that money reveals character rather than building it, that he and you worked so hard not to give me things, but to give me values. He looked down at the letter again. He says he's sorry if his success made it too easy for me to mistake privilege for accomplishment. I nodded, hearing Harold's wisdom in those words. My husband had built his career from nothing, working his way from the mailroom to the boardroom through intelligence and integrity. Unlike many self-made men, he had worried constantly about the effects of privilege on our only child. There's more, Gregory continued, his voice steadier now. He says that if I'm reading this letter, it means I've damaged my relationship with you to the point where you felt you had no choice but to take drastic measures. He looked up at me, a question in his eyes. Was there really no other choice, Mom? I considered his question carefully. I've spent 5 years trying other approaches, Gregory. Gentle conversations about feeling excluded, subtle reminders about reciprocity, direct requests for time with my grandchildren. I spread my hands in a gesture of resignation. None of it changed the pattern. He winced at the simple truth of my words. What else does your father say? I prompted, knowing Harold would have offered more than just a diagnosis of the problem. Gregory returned to the letter. He says that unlike money or property, respect can't be inherited. It must be earned through consistent actions. His voice grew stronger as he continued reading. He says that the measure of a man isn't in his professional achievements, but in how he treats those who can do nothing for him in return. A tear slipped down Gregory's cheek, dropping onto the paper. And he says that I'm his son, which means I have it in me to recognize my mistakes and make things right, that it's never too late to become the man he raised me to be. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, Harold's favorite timepiece, which I'd kept wound faithfully since his death. In that quiet moment, I could almost feel my husband's presence, his hand guiding our son back to the values that had somehow gotten lost in the pursuit of status and success. Finally, Gregory carefully refolded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. When he looked up, something had changed in his eyes, a clarity that hadn't been there before. I don't know what to say, Mom, except, he took a deep breath, except that I'm sorry, truly sorry. Not just for the dinner, but for everything. For treating you like a financial resource instead of my mother. For taking your generosity for granted. For, his voice broke slightly, for forgetting who I am and where I came from. I reached across the table and took his hand, the first physical contact we'd had in months. Your father believed in your capacity to change. So do I. That's why I did this. What happens now? He asked, sounding more like my son than the polished executive of Westlake Industries. That depends on what you want to happen, I replied. The for sale sign can come down. The financial arrangements can be restructured, but only if there's genuine change, Gregory. Not promises, actions. He nodded slowly. I understand. Then, with a sudden realization, he glanced at his watch. The executive lunch. I'm already late. Yes, you are, I agreed. What are you going to do about that? He considered the question carefully, and I could almost see the internal struggle playing out across his face, the pull of career ambition versus the newly awakened understanding of what truly mattered. I need to go, he finally said, and my heart sank momentarily until he continued. But not to that lunch. I need to talk to Cynthia. We need to have a family meeting with the kids. And then, he took a deep breath. Then I need to figure out how to make this right. As he stood to leave, he hesitated, then circled the table and did something he hadn't done in years. He hugged me, properly hugged me, the way he used to before success and status became his guiding stars. Dad would be so disappointed in me, he whispered. I held him tightly, feeling the tremor in his shoulders. Your father would say that disappointment is temporary, but character is permanent. He'd tell you it's not about who you've been, but who you choose to be from this moment forward. When we separated, Gregory wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a gesture so reminiscent of his teenage years that it made my heart ache. I'll call you tonight, he promised. We'll talk about everything. The house, the financial arrangements, the board position, all of it. I'll be here, I assured him. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen, emotionally drained, yet strangely peaceful. Harold's letter had done what my actions alone might not have accomplished. It had reached the core of the man our son was meant to be, the man who had been gradually disappearing beneath layers of entitlement and ambition. I had no illusions that a single conversation would magically fix years of dysfunctional patterns. Gregory's remorse might be genuine in this moment, but lasting change would require sustained effort. Cynthia might resist the shift in their family dynamic. The grandchildren might need time to adjust to a grandmother who was suddenly more present in their lives. But for the first time in years, there was hope, real hope that our family could heal, that the values Harold and I had worked so hard to instill might yet flourish. I went to the window and looked out at the for sale sign in my front yard. It had served its purpose as a powerful visual symbol of what Gregory stood to lose. Now it would serve as a reminder of the day everything changed, the day my son discovered that excluding his mother from a dinner was the most expensive mistake he'd ever made. Not because of the $1,143.87 charged to my credit card, but because it finally forced him to confront the man he had become, and the man he still had the potential to be. The remainder of the day passed in a strange limbo of anticipation and reflection. I puttered around my garden, deadheading roses and pulling weeds, activities that had always helped me process difficult emotions. The for sale sign stood sentinel at the edge of my property, drawing curious glances from neighbors and passers-by. At 4:37 p.m., my phone rang, Cynthia's name appearing on the screen. I briefly considered letting it go to voicemail, but that would only delay the inevitable. "Hello, Cynthia," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Judith." Her tone was icy, controlled. "Gregory just told me what you've done. I hope you realize this little power play of yours affects more than just him." I sat down on my garden bench, brushing soil from my hands. "I'm well aware of the implications for your family. That was rather the point. Our children's college fund? Really? That's stooping pretty low even for you." I noted her choice of words, even for you, revealing a long-standing animosity I'd suspected but never directly confronted. "The funds are still dedicated to their education," I replied calmly. "They've simply been moved to a trust that ensures they'll be used for that purpose, rather than, say, kitchen renovations or luxury vacations." Her sharp intake of breath told me the barb had landed. 3 years ago, I'd added $25,000 to the college fund, only to discover months later that their kitchen had been mysteriously upgraded while the fund balance remained essentially unchanged. "This is exactly why Gregory didn't invite you to dinner," she snapped. "You're passive-aggressive and judgmental. You've never approved of me or how we choose to live our lives. On the contrary, Cynthia, I've been excessively supportive of how you choose to live your lives, financially speaking at least. Perhaps that's been my mistake." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that my support enabled behaviors that weren't sustainable or healthy for any of us. Using my credit card for a family dinner I wasn't invited to was simply the final straw." A long pause followed. When Cynthia spoke again, her voice had lost some of its edge. "Gregory said you're on the board at Westlake, that you've been a shareholder all this time and never told us." "Yes. Why would you keep that secret?" It was a fair question, perhaps the first genuine one she'd ever asked me. Harold believed Gregory needed to make his own way, to earn his success rather than trading on family connections. I honored his wishes. Another pause. "And now?" "Now I believe transparency serves us better than secrets. Gregory's promotion should stand on its own merits, and it will if he's earned it legitimately." "Martin Westlake called him into his office this afternoon," Cynthia said, her voice dropping. "Gregory's there now." This was news to me. "I see. If he loses this promotion because of your intervention, I'll never forgive you." The threat hung between us, empty, ultimately, since Cynthia's forgiveness had never been something I possessed in the first place. The promotion was never the issue, Cynthia. It was the celebration of it, a celebration that included your parents, your sister, even your cousins, all charged to my credit card, while I sat home alone. I kept my voice steady, determined to make her understand. It was the pattern of taking without giving back, of excluding the very person who has supported you both financially and emotionally for years. "You make it sound so black and white," she protested, but with less conviction than before. "Perhaps because some things are." After a moment, Cynthia sighed. What do you want from us, Judith? Just tell me what it will take to fix this, to get the college fund back, to stop the house sale, to make this board of directors situation go away. That's not how this works, I replied gently. I'm not holding these things hostage in exchange for specific demands. I'm resetting our entire relationship to one based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. That sounds nice in theory, but what does it mean in practice? It means I'll be more present in my grandchildren's lives. Weekly dinners, school events, music recitals. It means financial support will come with transparency and accountability on both sides. It means I'm treated as family, not as a convenient resource to be tapped when needed and ignored when inconvenient. The line went quiet for so long, I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke, her voice subdued. I'll talk to Gregory when he gets home. This is a lot to process. I understand. It's a significant recalibration for all of us. After we disconnected, I returned to my gardening, noticing how the evening light cast long shadows across the yard, where Gregory had learned to ride a bicycle, where he'd practiced baseball with Harold, where we'd hosted countless family barbecues in happier times, memories embedded in the very soil I now worked with my hands. Just after 7 p.m., an unfamiliar car pulled into my driveway, a sleek black Tesla with tinted windows. Martin Westlake himself emerged, straightening his bespoke suit as he approached my garden. Mrs. Harmon, he greeted me with a formal nod. I hope you don't mind my stopping by unannounced. Not at all, Martin, I replied, removing my gardening gloves, though I admit I'm surprised to see you here rather than at the office. Some conversations are better had in person, away from corporate ears. He glanced at the for sale sign. May I ask if that's part of your situation with Gregory? I nodded, gesturing toward the porch where we could sit and talk more comfortably. I had a long discussion with your son this afternoon, Martin said once we were seated. It was illuminating. In what way? He told me everything. The financial support you've provided, the dinner he excluded you from, even the letter from Harold. Martin shook his head slightly. I knew your husband well, Judith. We built Westlake together from nothing. His integrity was legendary in an industry not known for it. Yes, it was, I agreed, wondering where this conversation was heading. Gregory has his father's intelligence and drive, Martin continued, but somewhere along the way he lost sight of Harold's values. He leaned forward, his expression serious. I've put his promotion on hold. My heart sank. Despite everything, I hadn't wanted to damage Gregory's career. That wasn't my intention when I revealed my board position. I know that, and it's not a punishment. It's an opportunity for growth. Martin's stern expression softened slightly. I've assigned him to lead our new community engagement initiative. For the next 6 months, he'll be working directly with the nonprofits and educational institutions we support, managing a substantial philanthropic budget. I raised an eyebrow, understanding the strategy. Removing him from sales and placing him in a position focused on giving rather than getting. Exactly. It's a lateral move, not a demotion. Same compensation, different focus. Martin stood, preparing to leave. Harold would have done the same thing. In fact, he did something similar for me in our early days when my ambition was outpacing my character. As he walked toward his car, he turned back with a final thought. Your son is at a crossroads, Judith. So is your family. What happened yesterday at that dinner was unfortunate, but what happens next will define all of you for years to come. I watched his Tesla glide silently away, reflecting on his words. A crossroads indeed, not just for Gregory, but for all of us. The choices made in the coming days and weeks would either heal the fractures in our family or deepen them beyond repair. My phone chimed with a text message from Gregory. We need to talk, all of us. Can we come over tomorrow evening? Zach and Emma want to see you too. I typed my reply with careful deliberation. Yes, dinner at 6. I'll cook. This is your family's home too, regardless of whose name is on the deed. As darkness fell, I finally went inside, leaving the for sale sign standing in my front yard, not because I intended to sell my beloved home, but because some visual reminders were too powerful to remove just yet. The lessons of the past 24 hours were still taking root. Tomorrow would be soon enough to decide which plants in this family garden would be pruned, which would be nurtured, and which might need to be replanted entirely. If you're enjoying this story of family dynamics and reclaiming personal power, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to like this video too. I spent the following day preparing for dinner with an attention to detail that might have seemed excessive to an outside observer. Each element was chosen with deliberate care. Harold's favorite lasagna recipe, the good china we'd received as wedding gifts 43 years ago, fresh flowers from my garden arranged in my grandmother's crystal vase. This wouldn't be just any meal. It would be a reset point, a new beginning. The symbolism mattered. By 5:45 p.m., everything was ready. The dining room table, which hadn't hosted a full family meal in over 2 years, was set for 5. The lasagna was bubbling in the oven, filling the house with familiar aromas. A simple green salad waited in the refrigerator. For dessert, I'd made Harold's beloved apple crumble, using fruit from the tree Gregory had helped his father plant on his 10th birthday. At precisely 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my dress and went to answer it. Gregory stood on the porch, looking uncharacteristically casual in jeans and a sweater rather than his usual business attire. Behind him were Cynthia, impeccably dressed as always, but subdued, and my grandchildren, Zach, now nearly as tall as his father, and Emma, her long hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. "We brought wine," Gregory said, offering a bottle. "And flowers." Cynthia stepped forward with a bouquet of mixed blooms, not the elaborate professional arrangements she typically favored, but something simpler and more heartfelt. "Thank you," I said, accepting both gifts with genuine appreciation. "Please, come in." As they entered, I noticed Emma carrying a large portfolio case. "What have you got there, sweetheart?" She exchanged a glance with her brother before answering. "Some things to show you. After dinner, if that's okay?" "Of course." I led them into the living room, where awkward silence threatened to descend until Zach broke it by walking straight to the piano in the corner. "Does this still work?" he asked, running his fingers lightly over the keys. "It does," I replied, surprised by his interest. "Your grandfather kept it perfectly tuned, and I've maintained that tradition." "Cool." He sat on the bench and began playing a simple melody, something classical that I vaguely recognized. "Mr. Abernathy's been teaching me. I'm not very good yet." I stared in astonishment. "You're taking piano lessons? Since when?" "About 6 months," Gregory answered, looking slightly ashamed. "We should have told you. 6 months of lessons I'd known nothing about. 6 months of a shared interest with my grandson that had been kept from me. The realization stung, but I pushed the hurt aside. This evening wasn't about cataloging past exclusions. It was about building a new framework for the future. "You play beautifully, Zach," I said, moving to stand beside the piano. "Your grandfather would have loved to hear you." He looked up with a shy smile. "Dad said Grandpa was really good." "He was extraordinary," I confirmed. "Self-taught, but with a natural gift. This was his sanctuary when the world became too much." "Like me," Zach said softly, returning to his playing. I glanced at Gregory, who nodded almost imperceptibly, an acknowledgement of this unexpected connection between grandson and grandfather, a thread I hadn't known existed. Dinner began awkwardly, with careful small talk about the weather and upcoming school events. Halfway through the main course, however, Gregory set down his fork and cleared his throat. "We need to address the elephant in the room," he said, looking directly at me. "Mom, I've explained to Cynthia and the kids what happened. All of it. The dinner at Hartwell's, the credit card, the history of financial support you've provided, and the changes you've made in response." Cynthia nodded stiffly. "We understand that things need to change." "And how do you feel about that?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. She hesitated, carefully choosing her words. "Initially, I was angry. It felt like you were punishing all of us for one mistake. And now? Now I realize it wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern we all participated in." She glanced at her children, then back to me. "Gregory showed me the financial statement you compiled, all the contributions you've made over the years. I had no idea it amounted to so much." "That's part of the problem," I said gently. "The support became invisible, expected, taken for granted." "Like you," Emma interjected suddenly, her teenage directness cutting through the adult careful conversation. "You became invisible too, Grandma. We didn't mean for it to happen, but it did." Her insight, so clear and unvarnished, momentarily silenced the table. "Yes," I finally acknowledged, "that's exactly what happened. We've talked a lot as a family since yesterday," Gregory said, "about values, priorities, the example we've been setting for Zach and Emma." He reached for Cynthia's hand. "We haven't been the people we want to be, The people Dad raised me to be. Martin Westlake spoke with us this morning, Cynthia added, about Gregory's new position with the Community Engagement Initiative. He's making me work with charity people, Zach explained, with the slight disdain only a 16-year-old could muster. We're all going to be involved, Gregory corrected. It's a family commitment, weekly volunteer hours for everyone. I looked around the table, trying to gauge whether this was genuine or merely an attempt to appease me and regain access to the financial support I'd withdrawn. That sounds like a significant shift for your family, I observed neutrally. It is, Cynthia admitted, but maybe it's the shift we need. She straightened her shoulders slightly. I've also decided to scale back my social media presence. It's been distorting our priorities, making us focus on appearances rather than substance. Coming from Cynthia, who documented every aspect of their carefully curated life online, this was perhaps the most surprising development of all. We've made some other decisions too, Gregory continued. We're putting our house on the market. What? This caught me completely off guard. Why would you do that? Because we can't afford it, he said simply. Not without your financial support, not with the lifestyle creep we've allowed to happen. The mortgage is underwater, the property taxes are crushing us, and the maintenance costs are out of control. We're looking at homes in Maplewood, Cynthia added, naming a modest neighborhood across town. Good schools, reasonable prices, closer to the community center where we'll be volunteering. I processed this information slowly. And you've discussed this with the children? We have, Gregory confirmed. Extensively. Emma leaned forward. Can I show you my portfolio now, Grandma? It relates to all this. At my nod, she retrieved the case she'd brought and carefully removed several large sheets of paper, spreading them across the cleared dinner table. These are my design concepts, she explained, suddenly animated in a way I'd rarely seen. For your house, I mean, if you decide not to sell it. I looked down at surprisingly sophisticated architectural sketches. What am I looking at exactly? A multi-generational living plan, Emma said proudly. Converting the guest wing into a separate apartment for us, with shared common spaces but private living areas, updating the kitchen and main bathroom to be more accessible as you get older, adding a music studio in the sunroom for Zach's piano. I stared at her in amazement. You designed all this? She's been taking architecture classes at the community college, Gregory explained. Another thing we should have told you about. It's just an idea, Emma said, suddenly self-conscious. Ms. Abernathy, she's my architecture teacher and Zach's piano teacher's wife. She helped me with the proportions and stuff. But if you're selling the house anyway... I'm not selling the house, I said quietly. That was never the real plan. It was a wake-up call, a way to make your father understand what was at stake. Hope flickered across Emma's face. So my designs could work? They're certainly worth discussing, I replied, genuinely impressed by her initiative and talent. But moving in together is a significant step. One that would require clear boundaries and expectations from everyone. That's what we want to talk about, Gregory said earnestly. A fresh start, with everything on the table. Finances, living arrangements, family responsibilities, time commitments. We've written a proposal, Cynthia added, reaching into her purse to retrieve a folder. A family contract of sorts. We spent all last night working on it. As I accepted the folder, I felt a surge of emotion. Not triumph or vindication, but something more complex and ultimately more satisfying. In forcing this crisis, I had created an opportunity for authentic change. The family seated around my table tonight was not the same family that had excluded me from their celebration dinner. Something fundamental had shifted. I'll review this carefully, I promised, setting the folder aside. But first, I think we should have dessert. Apple crumble. Your grandfather's favorite, Zach. And there's vanilla ice cream to go with it. As I stood to clear the plates, Emma jumped up to help me. In the kitchen, as we scooped ice cream onto warm servings of crumble, she spoke in a low voice. I'm sorry we've been such jerks, Grandma. I didn't realize, I never thought about how it must feel to be left out all the time. The simple apology, offered without prompting, touched me deeply. Thank you, Emma. That means a great deal to me. Would you really consider my design ideas? For the house? I would. They're quite impressive. She beamed, then hesitated. There's one more thing. I was wondering if you might teach me to garden. Your flowers are always so beautiful, and I thought maybe it could be something we do together. Just us. In that moment, I knew the for sale sign in my front yard had served its purpose. Tomorrow, it would come down. The important rebuilding had already begun. If you're enjoying this story of family reconciliation and personal growth, please take a moment to like this video and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I'd love to know who's following Judith's journey. 3 weeks after the family dinner that had reset our relationships, I sat in Martin Westlake's office, reviewing quarterly reports as part of my board responsibilities. The meeting had been productive, but was now winding down, shifting from business to more personal matters. "Gregory's doing remarkably well with the community initiative," Martin commented, leaning back in his chair. "I'll be honest, Judith, I had my doubts. Sales executives don't typically transition smoothly to philanthropic work." "He's his father's son," I replied. "Once he connects with the deeper purpose behind the work, his natural abilities shine through." Martin nodded thoughtfully. "I've assigned him to lead our education partnership with the downtown schools. He's already secured additional funding from 3 other corporations and organized a mentorship program for at-risk students." Pride swelled in my chest. This was the Gregory I'd always known existed beneath the veneer of corporate ambition and status-seeking, the compassionate, resourceful man Harold and I had raised him to be. "And how are things at home?" Martin asked. "Has the dust settled from your intervention?" "We're finding our way," I said, gathering my papers. The for sale sign came down the day after our family dinner. My granddaughter is redesigning part of the house for potential multi-generational living. My grandson is playing Harold's piano. Small steps, but meaningful ones. "And Cynthia?" I smiled slightly at his directness. Martin had known our family long enough to understand the dynamics at play. "Cynthia is adapting. She's scaled back her social media presence considerably. She's even joined me for coffee twice, just the 2 of us. Remarkable what a little financial leverage can accomplish," Martin observed wryly. "It wasn't about leverage in the end," I corrected him gently. "It was about establishing boundaries that fostered mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation." As I drove home from Westlake Industries, I reflected on the changes of the past 3 weeks. The family contract Gregory and Cynthia had presented that night had evolved through several iterations, with input from all of us, including Zach and Emma. The final version now hung on my refrigerator, a testament to our collective commitment to building healthier relationships. The core provisions were simple but powerful. Weekly family dinners at my house, with cooking responsibilities rotating among all family members, including the teenagers. Monthly transparency meetings where financial matters would be discussed openly, teaching Zach and Emma about budgeting, investing, and charitable giving. Dedicated one-on-one time between grandchildren and grandmother, piano lessons for Zach, gardening sessions for Emma. Clear financial boundaries, no more impromptu loans or unexplained expenses. Gregory and Cynthia would live within their means, with my financial support directed primarily toward the grandchildren's education and family emergencies only. The most significant change, however, was still unfolding. Gregory and Cynthia had listed their house for sale, downsizing to a more modest home that wouldn't require my financial subsidies to maintain. Meanwhile, Emma's multi-generational living design was being reviewed by a professional architect to determine its feasibility. I pulled into my driveway, noticing Zach's bicycle leaning against the porch railing, a sight that would have been unthinkable a month ago. He had taken to stopping by after school several times a week, ostensibly to practice on Harold's piano, but increasingly just to talk. Inside, I found him not at the piano, but at the kitchen table, homework spread before him, a half-eaten sandwich on a plate. "Hope it's okay I made myself lunch," he said, glancing up from his textbook. "Of course," I replied, hanging my purse on the hook by the door, a casual domestic moment that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. "What are you working on?" "History paper. We're studying the civil rights movement." He hesitated, then added, "Actually, I was hoping to ask you about that. Mom said you participated in some demonstrations back in the day?" I blinked in surprise. "Yes, I did. Your grandfather and I both did. But I'm surprised your mother mentioned it. She said I should ask you." Zach shrugged. "Said you probably had better stories than my textbook." I sat across from him, marveling at this unexpected bridge between generations. She's right about that. The textbooks never capture what it actually felt like to be there. For the next hour, I shared stories with my grandson about a chapter of my life that had never before been discussed in our family. My activism years, the principles Harold and I had fought for, the world we had hoped to build for our children and grandchildren. "That's why I was so disappointed in your father's recent behavior," I admitted toward the end of our conversation. not because of the money or the exclusion itself, but because it represented values so contrary to what your grandfather and I had tried to instill. Zach nodded thoughtfully. Dad's different now, since that night with your credit card and everything. He talks more about important stuff instead of just work and money. How do you feel about all the changes? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. The house sale, the potential move, the family contract. It's a lot of adjustment. He considered the question seriously. It was weird at first, especially seeing Dad get lectured by his boss and his mom in the same week. A smile flickered across his face. But honestly, home feels less tense now. Mom's not constantly stressing about what to post on Instagram. Dad actually helped me with my science project last weekend instead of saying he had to work. And the volunteering? I understand you've been helping at the community center. Zach's expression brightened unexpectedly. That's actually pretty cool. I'm teaching piano to little kids there on Saturdays. They're terrible at it, but they get so excited when they play even one song right. The front door opened before I could respond, and Emma burst in, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, a roll of blueprints under her arm. "Grandma, Mr. Donovan reviewed my designs," she exclaimed, barely pausing to drop her backpack before unfurling the blueprints across the kitchen table, displacing Zach's homework. "He made some structural modifications, but he says the basic concept is solid." Zach rolled his eyes but made room for his sister's excitement, gathering his books without complaint. Another small but meaningful change in our family dynamics. "Show me," I encouraged, examining the professional architectural renderings that had evolved from Emma's initial sketches. For the next half hour, Emma walked me through the proposed renovations to create a semi-independent apartment within my home. Separate entrances, shared common spaces, updated accessibility features for my future needs. The plans were thoughtful, practical, and surprisingly sensitive to preserving the historical character of the house Harold and I had lovingly maintained for decades. "It's a significant investment," I noted, reviewing the estimated costs, "and a major life change for everyone. Dad said to tell you he's already talked to the bank about financing options that don't involve your money," Emma reported. "And Mom's working on a budget for furnishings and stuff, using only what they'll make from selling their house." This evidence of their commitment to financial independence, without prompting from me, was perhaps the most encouraging sign yet. "Mr. Donovan says we could start the renovations next month if you approve," Emma continued, barely containing her excitement. "I could document the whole process for my architecture portfolio." "Let me review everything carefully first," I cautioned, not wanting to dampen her enthusiasm, but needing time to consider such a monumental change. Moving in together is a big step, one we shouldn't rush into without thorough consideration. Emma nodded, her expression suddenly serious beyond her years. "I know. That's what Dad said too. He said we need to earn back your trust before asking you to share your home with us." The maturity of this perspective, coming from Gregory via his daughter, nearly brought tears to my eyes. This was the man I'd raised, the values Harold and I had instilled, finally re-emerging after years of being buried beneath materialism and status-seeking. That evening, as I prepared for the weekly family dinner, Cynthia's turn to cook, bringing her mother's lasagna recipe in a gesture of culinary diplomacy, I found myself in Harold's study, speaking to his photograph on the desk. "You'd be proud of him," I told my husband's smiling image. "It took a crisis to remind him of who he really is, but our son is finding his way back to the values we taught him." I ran my fingers over the carved wooden box that had contained Harold's letter, the words from beyond the grave that had reached Gregory in a way my living voice couldn't. "And you'd love these grandchildren, Harold. Truly know them, as I'm finally getting to do. Zach has your musical ear and your quiet thoughtfulness. Emma has your creativity and determination. They're extraordinary young people when given the chance to be more than accessories to their parents' curated lifestyle." A knock at the study door interrupted my one-sided conversation. Gregory stood in the doorway, a bottle of wine in one hand, uncertainty in his expression. "Mom, Cynthia sent me ahead to see if you needed help setting up." His eyes moved to Harold's photograph. "Talking to Dad?" "He's a good listener," I said with a small smile. "Always was." Gregory nodded, entering the study hesitantly. This room had always been somewhat sacred space, Harold's domain even years after his passing. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, setting the wine bottle on a side table. "The letter Dad wrote, would it be okay if I framed it? Not to display, just to have as a personal reminder. The request touched me deeply. Of course, it's yours. I read it every morning, he admitted. It helps me recalibrate when I feel myself slipping back into old patterns. Your father had that effect on people, I said. He made you want to be your best self, not through pressure or criticism, but through his unwavering belief in your capacity for goodness. Gregory's eyes glistened slightly. I miss him, especially now when I'm trying so hard to change, to be the man he raised me to be. He's still guiding you, I assured him, touching Harold's photograph gently. Through his letter, through the values he instilled, through the example he set, I met my son's gaze directly. And I'm still here too, not just as a financial safety net or occasional dinner guest, but as your mother, with all the love, wisdom, and occasional tough truths that roll in tales. I know, Gregory said softly, and I'm finally ready to listen. The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of Cynthia and Emma. Gregory offered me his arm in a courtly gesture that reminded me powerfully of his father. "Shall we go greet our family?" he asked. As we walked together toward the front door, I reflected on how quickly life could change, how a single excluded dinner invitation and a borrowed credit card had catalyzed a transformation that no amount of gentle conversations or subtle hints had accomplished over the years. Sometimes love required dramatic action. Sometimes respect needed to be commanded rather than requested. And sometimes the most powerful lesson came wrapped in the most painful package. But the results, this new normal we were carefully constructing together, made every difficult moment worthwhile. 2 months after my credit card intervention, I was tending my autumn garden when an unfamiliar luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. The driver's door opened to reveal Margaret Green, Cynthia's mother and Gregory's mother-in-law, emerging with the careful precision of someone entering foreign territory. Margaret and I had maintained a cordial but distant relationship over the years. Our interactions had been limited to major family events where we exchanged pleasantries before gravitating to opposite ends of the room. The sapphire necklace I'd given her last Christmas, the one Gregory hadn't even remembered, had been acknowledged with a perfunctory thank you note and never worn in my presence. "Judith," she called, approaching with an arrangement of store-bought flowers. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I replied, removing my gardening gloves and brushing soil from my knees. "This is an unexpected pleasure." The slight arch of her eyebrow suggested she detected my carefully neutral tone. Margaret had always been perceptive, a quality that made our mutual avoidance all the more deliberate over the years. "I've been meaning to stop by," she said, handing me the flowers. "To talk." I invited her inside, curious about this unprecedented visit. In the 14 years since Gregory and Cynthia's wedding, Margaret had never once come to my home unaccompanied by her husband or daughter. In the kitchen, I arranged her flowers in a vase while she declined my offer of tea, coffee, or something stronger. Her gaze swept across the refrigerator where the family contract was prominently displayed, lingering on the architectural blueprints for the renovation now spread across my dining room table. "So it's true," she said finally. "They're really planning to move in with you." The purpose of her visit became clearer. "We're exploring the possibility," I confirmed, setting the flower arrangement on the counter. "Emma's design is quite ingenious, separate living spaces with shared common areas." Margaret nodded, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the edge of my kitchen island. "Richard and I were surprised when they listed their house, even more surprised when they turned down our offer to help with the down payment on a new one." The unspoken question hung in the air. What had changed in their family dynamic? "Gregory and Cynthia are making different choices these days," I said carefully, "more aligned with their actual resources rather than aspirational lifestyle." "Because you forced their hand," Margaret stated, not accusingly but matter-of-factly. "With the credit card, the dinner at Hartwell's, so she knew about that." I wondered how much Gregory and Cynthia had shared about my financial intervention and how it had been framed. I established boundaries that were long overdue, I acknowledged. The dinner was merely the catalyst. Margaret surprised me by nodding in agreement. "I told Richard at the time it was inappropriate to use your card that way, especially when you weren't included in the celebration." This admission, that she had recognized the impropriety even as it occurred, shifted my perception slightly. Perhaps Margaret had more self-awareness than I'd given her credit for. "Why are you here, Margaret?" I asked directly. "I assume it's not just to discuss my family's living arrangements." She met my gaze squarely. I want to understand what happened, not just that night, but the whole situation. Cynthia's been different. Gregory too. Even the grandchildren seem changed. She frowned slightly. Zach called us last week to cancel our usual shopping trip because he had piano lessons with you. He's never canceled before. I heard the hurt beneath her carefully controlled tone. Margaret and Richard had always been the grandparents of choice, the ones who took the children shopping for designer clothes, who funded lavish birthday parties, who reinforced the materialistic values that Gregory and Cynthia had embraced. Things are rebalancing, I said gently. It doesn't mean the children value you less. It means they're developing broader relationships and different interests. Interests you've encouraged, she noted. Interests I've made space for, I corrected. Zach already loved music. Emma already had an eye for design. They just needed someone to nurture those parts of themselves that didn't fit the carefully curated image their parents were maintaining. Margaret walked to the refrigerator, studying the family contract with its neatly listed expectations and commitments. And this contract was your idea? Actually, it was Gregory and Cynthia's, I replied. After I withdrew my financial support and revealed my board position at Westlake, they realized changes were necessary. The contract evolved from there, with input from all of us. She turned back to me, her expression difficult to read. Richard believes you manipulated them, used your financial leverage to force them to conform to your expectations. And what do you believe, Margaret? She considered the question for a long moment. I think you did what I've never had the courage to do, demand respect rather than trying to purchase affection. The candor of her response startled me. This was more insight than Margaret had revealed in 14 years of family gatherings. The difference, she continued, is that you had real leverage, the house down payment, the Westlake board position. We've never had that kind of influence with Cynthia. She takes what we offer, but keeps us at arm's length. Financial support without boundaries creates dependency, not closeness, I observed. I learned that lesson the hard way. Margaret nodded slowly. The sapphire necklace you gave me last Christmas. What about it? Cynthia told me you gave it to me because blue is my favorite color, that you'd noticed the blue accents in my home during Thanksgiving dinner. She met my eyes directly. But I never wear blue. My home has no blue accents. You couldn't possibly have noticed what wasn't there. I sighed, understanding dawning. She never gave you the real gift, did she? The one with the note explaining its significance? There was another gift? A first edition collection of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poetry, I explained. I remembered you mentioning at Gregory's college graduation that you'd written your thesis on Victorian women poets. The note said I'd finally found a copy after searching for several years. Margaret's carefully composed expression faltered. I did write my thesis on Browning, but how could you possibly have remembered that? It was a passing comment nearly 20 years ago. I pay attention, I said simply, to the things people care about, the things that matter. She turned away, blinking rapidly. Cynthia gave me the necklace, said you'd chosen it specifically for me. I never wear blue. It washes out my complexion, but I didn't want to seem ungrateful. And the book? I never received it. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. For years, our relationship had been filtered through Cynthia's lens. Her selective delivery of gifts, her carefully edited versions of conversations, her strategic management of our interactions. She kept us apart, Margaret said finally. Controlled the narrative, while benefiting from both our contributions, I added. Margaret moved to the window, looking out at my garden. The family dinner last night. She hesitated. Cynthia said you've instituted mandatory weekly dinners as a condition of your continued support. I shook my head. The dinners were Gregory's idea, a way for all of us to reconnect as a family. There are no conditions beyond mutual respect and taking turns with the cooking. They seem happy, Margaret admitted. More grounded. Zach talks about his music now instead of the latest gaming system. Emma showed me her architectural drawings instead of asking for a new phone. They're discovering who they are beyond the trappings of status and materialism, I said. It's been beautiful to witness. Margaret turned back to me, her carefully maintained facade showing unexpected vulnerability. Where do Richard and I fit in this new arrangement? This multi-generational living plan? The question was loaded with insecurity and genuine concern. For the first time, I saw Margaret not as a rival grandmother or social climber, but as a woman whose relationship with her daughter and grandchildren had been built on shifting sands of materialism and appearances, a foundation now crumbling under the weight of newfound authenticity. That depends on what you want, I replied honestly. If you're looking to maintain the old dynamic, being the grandparents who provide expensive gifts and experiences without deeper connection, that role is becoming less relevant in their lives. She flinched slightly at my directness. But, I continued more gently, if you're interested in knowing who your grandchildren really are, their passions, their struggles, their authentic selves, there's plenty of room for that relationship to grow. The renovation plans include guest quarters specifically designed for extended family visits. Designed by Emma? With you and Richard in mind, I confirmed. She remembers that you collect antique perfume bottles. The bathroom includes a display shelf for them. Margaret's composure finally broke completely, tears welling in her eyes. I had no idea she even noticed. Children notice everything, I said, especially the genuine parts of us that peek through our carefully constructed personas. She dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I don't know how to do this. To connect without buying things. To be valued for who I am, rather than what I provide. Neither did I admitted. I'm learning alongside them. We all are. Margaret gathered herself, straightening her shoulders with the practiced dignity of a woman accustomed to maintaining appearances at all costs. But something had shifted between us. A truth acknowledged, a possibility recognized. The poetry book, she said after a moment. Do you still have it? In my study. I discovered it hadn't been delivered when you never mentioned it. I'd like to see it. And perhaps we could discuss Browning sometime. Over tea. It was a small opening, a tentative step toward a different kind of relationship. Not just with me, but potentially with her daughter and grandchildren as well. I'd like that, I said sincerely. And I think Gregory and Cynthia would too. To see their mothers finding common ground beyond competing for influence. As I walked Margaret to her car afterward, the poetry book carefully wrapped and tucked under her arm, she paused before getting in. Richard still thinks you manipulated them, you know, with the credit card and the board position. And you? She considered this, then offered a small but genuine smile. I think you loved your son enough to risk his anger in order to save him from himself. That's a different kind of courage than I've ever had. She slipped into the driver's seat, but perhaps it's not too late to learn. I watched her drive away, reflecting on how unexpected allies can emerge from the most unlikely places. The ripple effects of my credit card intervention continued to spread, touching lives and relationships in ways I could never have anticipated. The family dinner that Gregory hadn't invited me to had ultimately created space for a feast of deeper connections, ones based not on financial transactions or social positioning, but on authentic sharing of who we really were beneath the carefully curated exteriors. Even Margaret Green, it seemed, was hungry for that kind of nourishment. If you're enjoying this story of family transformation and rediscovered connections, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to like this video too. 1 year to the day after Gregory had asked to use my credit card for a family dinner I wasn't invited to, I stood in my newly renovated kitchen, preparing for a very different kind of celebration. The house hummed with activity, Emma arranging flowers from my garden in crystal vases, Zach practicing a new piano piece in what was now a proper music room, Gregory and Cynthia setting the dining room table with my grandmother's china. The renovation had been completed 2 months earlier, transforming my home into a harmonious blend of private and shared spaces. The East Wing now contained Gregory and Cynthia's apartment, modest by their former standards, but comfortable and beautifully designed with Emma's thoughtful touches. My own living area had been updated with subtle accessibility features that acknowledged my aging without emphasizing it. The common spaces, kitchen, dining room, library, and music room, belonged to all of us, governed by the family contract that still hung on the refrigerator, though we rarely needed to reference it anymore. Mom? Where's the serving platter for the roast? Gregory called from the dining room. Top shelf of the butler's pantry, I replied, smiling at the domestic ordinariness of the question. A year ago, Gregory wouldn't have known we had a butler's pantry, let alone felt comfortable enough to rummage through it. The doorbell rang, and Emma rushed to answer it. They're here! Voices filled the entryway, Margaret and Richard arriving with a homemade apple tart and a vintage bottle of wine. Behind them came Martin Westlake and his wife Eleanor, followed by my oldest friend Patricia and her husband. Last through the door was James Abernathy, Zach's piano teacher and Emma's architectural mentor, carrying a small gift bag. "Quite a gathering," Margaret commented as she joined me in the kitchen, immediately donning an apron to help with final preparations. Our tentative tea discussions about Victorian poetry had evolved into a genuine friendship over the past year, one of the most unexpected and rewarding outcomes of the family reset. "It feels right," I said, passing her a bowl of freshly made cranberry sauce. "Having everyone who contributed to our journey here to mark the anniversary?" Margaret's eyes crinkled with understanding. 1 year since the infamous credit card dinner. Who would have imagined we'd end up here? Indeed, who could have predicted that my desperate act of boundary setting would lead not just to a healthier relationship with my son and his family, but to this expanded circle of meaningful connections? Gregory appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking relaxed in casual clothes rather than his former uniform of designer suits. His 6-month community engagement assignment had turned permanent, with Martin creating a new executive position overseeing all of Westlake Industries' philanthropic initiatives. The pay was less than his former sales role, but the fulfillment was evidently greater. I hadn't seen my son this content since he was a young man working alongside his father. "Need any help in here?" he asked, glancing between Margaret and me with appreciation for our unexpected alliance. "Everything's under control," I assured him. "How's the table coming along?" "Perfect, thanks to Emma's precise instructions." He lowered his voice slightly. "And Cynthia's actually following them without trying to redesign everything." The good-natured joke reflected another significant change. Cynthia had gradually relinquished her need to control every aesthetic detail, recognizing Emma's genuine talent for design. Their relationship had softened as Cynthia found other outlets for her organizational skills, primarily in her new role coordinating volunteer efforts at the community center where the family now spent Saturday mornings. As we gathered around the expanded dining table, a beautiful piece crafted by a local artisan from wood salvaged from an old barn, I found myself at the head, with Gregory at the opposite end. This positioning had evolved naturally over our weekly family dinners, an acknowledgement of our shared leadership in this reconstructed family. "Before we begin," Gregory said, raising his glass, "I'd like to propose a toast. 1 year ago today, I asked my mother for her credit card to pay for a family dinner she wasn't invited to." A ripple of knowing laughter circled the table. The story had become something of a legend among our extended circle, though always told with the serious acknowledgement of the pain and growth it had catalyzed. "It was perhaps the most expensive dinner I never ate," Gregory continued, his expression turning thoughtful. "Because what followed, Mom's justified intervention, Dad's posthumous letter, the difficult conversations and realignments, cost me far more than the bill at Hartwell's. It cost me my comfortable illusions, my entitled expectations, and my superficial values." He looked directly at me, his eyes reflecting a depth and authenticity I'd feared was lost forever. "But what I gained in return has been immeasurable. A genuine relationship with my mother, a healthier marriage based on partnership rather than appearances, a home where my children can discover their true gifts rather than performing versions of themselves designed to impress others." Gregory raised his glass higher. "So today, we don't just mark an anniversary, we celebrate a rebirth, and we honor the woman whose courage made it possible, who loved her family enough to risk losing us in order to truly find us again. To Judith," Martin added, raising his own glass, "who reminded all of us that respect isn't an entitlement, but something earned through consistent action. To Grandma," Emma and Zach chimed in unison, their young faces shining with genuine affection rather than the polite deference they'd once shown me. As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with exclusion had culminated in this moment of expansive inclusion, not just of me into my son's life, but of authentic connection into all our relationships. After dinner, as our guests mingled in the living room, Zach approached the piano. The casual background conversations quieted as he settled on the bench, adjusting his posture the way Harold always had. "I'd like to play something I've been working on," he announced with quiet confidence. "It's a piece my grandfather composed. Grandma found the sheet music in his study and shared it with me." As Zach's fingers touched the keys, Harold's melody filled the room, a composition I hadn't heard in over 20 years. The music was quintessentially Harold, complex yet accessible, technically challenging yet emotionally direct. Zach played it beautifully, honoring his grandfather's work while adding subtle interpretations that made it his own. Tears filled my eyes as I watched my grandson channel Harold's musical gift, keeping alive not just the notes on the page, but the values and sensibilities that had shaped them. Beside me, Gregory squeezed my hand, his own eyes glistening. When the final notes faded, the room erupted in genuine appreciation. Zach accepted the praise with the same mixture of pride and humility that had characterized his grandfather, a legacy more valuable than any financial inheritance could have been. Later, as the evening wound down, I found myself alone with Gregory in the kitchen, washing dishes side by side, a simple domestic task that had become one of our most meaningful rituals over the past year. "I've been thinking," he said, carefully drying one of the crystal wine glasses, "about the credit card, about how differently everything might have turned out if you just let it go, if you'd accepted being excluded and continued funding our lifestyle without question. We might never have known what we were missing," I acknowledged, "the authentic connections we've built this past year. I might never have really known my children," Gregory admitted, "or myself for that matter." He set down the glass and turned to face me directly. "Thank you for having the courage to say no when it would have been easier to say yes, for seeing the man I could be rather than enabling the man I had become. That's what parents do," I replied simply, "or what we should do at least. Love you enough to risk your anger in service of your growth." "I've saved Dad's letter," he said, "for Zach and Emma, for when they're older and facing their own crossroads." I nodded, appreciating the continuity of wisdom across generations. Harold would like that. He always took the long view. As our guests departed with warm embraces rather than formal handshakes, I felt the full circle of our journey complete itself. The credit card that had funded a celebration I wasn't welcome to attend had ultimately purchased something priceless, a family rebuilt on foundations of respect, authenticity, and mutual care. Martin and Eleanor were the last to leave, with Martin lingering a moment at the door. "You know," he said quietly, "Harold always believed Gregory would find his way eventually. In our last conversation before he became ill, he told me his greatest hope was that his son would one day value relationships over resources, connection over status. He would be proud of where we've landed," I replied, gazing back at the living room where my family was gathering for an impromptu board game, laughter filling the space that had once echoed with my solitude. "Indeed," Martin agreed, though I doubt even Harold could have predicted that the catalyst would be a dinner invitation, or rather, the lack of one. After closing the door behind him, I returned to the living room, where Emma was dealing cards with dramatic flair, while Zach provided a playful piano soundtrack. Gregory and Cynthia sat side by side on the sofa, their competitive banter lacking the edge it once carried. "Grandma, you're on my team," Emma called, patting the seat beside her. "We're playing Strategy Alliance, and I need someone who thinks 3 steps ahead." "That's definitely Mom," Gregory affirmed with a smile. "She's been outmaneuvering the rest of us for years. We just didn't realize it until recently." As I joined my granddaughter at the game table, I thought about the sequence of events that had led us here, how a single act of exclusion had ultimately created the most inclusive chapter of our family story, how my response to that exclusion, though painful and confrontational in the moment, had cleared the path for genuine connection. The credit card Gregory had borrowed wasn't just plastic and numbers. It was a symbol of the transactional relationship we'd fallen into, one where financial support substituted for mutual respect, where material provision masked emotional absence. By reclaiming the card, I had reclaimed something far more valuable, my place in the family and my son's opportunity for authentic growth. The game proceeded with good-natured competition, each of us fully present in a way we'd never been during our previous sporadic gatherings. No phones appeared, no one checked social media, no status was being performed for invisible audiences. We were simply a family, enjoying each other's company on an ordinary evening that felt extraordinary precisely because of its genuine ordinariness. Later, after Zach and Emma had gone to bed in their rooms in the family wing, I found myself back in Harold's study, the one room I'd kept almost exactly as it had been during his lifetime. The leather chair still held the impression of his form. His books still lined the shelves in his idiosyncratic organizational system. his presence remained palpable here, a quiet witness to our family's evolution. I opened the top drawer of his desk and removed the wooden box that had contained his letter to Gregory. Empty now, but still carrying the weight of its purpose. Beside it, I placed a letter of my own, freshly written and sealed. "For the next generation," I whispered to Harold's photograph, "when they need it most." My letter contained the story of this past year, how a borrowed credit card and an excluded mother had catalyzed a family's transformation. How boundaries, when set with love rather than vengeance, could create space for growth rather than distance. How sometimes the most loving act was not accommodation, but confrontation. Someday, perhaps, one of my grandchildren would face a similar crossroads with their own children. And when that day came, this letter would be waiting, a reminder that family relationships too valuable to be purchased are sometimes too important to be comfortable. As I turned out the study light and prepared for bed, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had begun with hurt and betrayal had led us to healing and authenticity. The mother who had been excluded from a family dinner had become the heart of a multi-generational home filled with connection and purpose. And the credit card that Gregory had borrowed to fund a celebration I wasn't welcome to attend, it had indeed purchased something of immeasurable value, just not what any of us had expected. It had bought us the truth, and with that truth, the chance to become the family we were always meant to be. Before I wrap up my story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for following along. If this journey has touched you in any way, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and share this story with someone who might need to be reminded that sometimes setting boundaries is the most loving thing we can do. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your place at the table, especially when you're the one who owns the table.